Backseas Musical Podcast.
I can't speak for all of you, but for most of us, we all have certain songs that are stored in our heads that immediately trigger vivid recollections of stuff that's happened in our lives. I've got a bunch of those songs that I remember from high school, songs from college, songs that remind me of great times in my life, and songs that were with me when things were kind of turning to shit. Part of that is because music has a tendency to piece together the roadmap that we follow for our entire lives. In the 1980s, I was listening to new stuff all the time, and so in a very real way, the songs of the MTV generation are a part of my soundtrack. Even if the song sucks, it's often attached to something, good or bad. It's just there. Thankfully, most of the songs that took me there were actually pretty good songs, and some of them were even great. Which brings me to the 1980s new wave post-punk band from San Francisco, Romeo Void. Between 1981 and 1984, Romeo Void released just 3 albums. But among those records were 2 unforgettable classics. The first one was Never Say Never. This was an early MTV classic, and as a 16-year-old boy, there was perhaps nothing more impactful than hearing a female lead singer, Debora Iyall, sing the words, "I might like you better if we slept together." Now, those lyrics might not have the same impact on me today, but in 1981, you're damn frickin' right they did. By October of 1984, I was a worldly 18-year-old college freshman. So when Romeo Void released their hit single, A Girl in Trouble is a Temporary Thing, from their album Instincts, it had taken on a much different effect. It was a much more sophisticated song, and I was a much more sophisticated guy with much more sophisticated thoughts, and that song is directly attached to exactly what I'm talking about. Romeo Void would split up soon after the release of that final album. Debora Iyall would release a couple of solo albums over the next few years, but for the most part, she's dedicated much of her life to teaching Native American art to students in New Mexico. But music has never been too far away. In fact, Romeo Void is about to release a terrific live album of a show that was recorded at the famous Mabuhay Gardens in San Francisco on November 14th, 1980, approximately 9 months before the release of their debut album. And it's a really interesting document of a band that was about to break big and get into my head for the next 40 years. My guest today is the wonderful Debora Iyall, lead singer for Romeo Void, on Backseas Musical Podcast.
Hello, Baxi.
Hey, Debora, how are you?
I'm doing great. Look at all that music behind you.
Oh, that's just half of it. That's all the good
Oh, I'm sure.
all the good stuff is upstairs.
Okay, got you.
I'm so happy to talk to you, and I want to start off by telling you a real live story, a real story that actually doesn't happen without Romeo Void. It's late '84, early '85, and I'm in college, and I happen to be friends with this woman who I developed this enormous crush on, and this is a woman who's way out of my league. I mean, I really had no business liking this woman at all. But we had a bunch of friends, and we go to these clubs, and I was never one for dancing, and even less likely to ask a woman to endure the difficulty of dancing with me. But we're out one night, and the club starts playing "A Girl in Trouble,"
Okay.
and suddenly the song is kicking off, and Benjamin's saxophone is playing, and suddenly she grabs my hand and says, "I love this song. Let's dance." And the two of us wound up dancing for like the whole night. And the long and short of it is that relationship went absolutely nowhere, but it's it's still a moment in my head. And here I am 39 years later, and I still remember that like it was yesterday every single time I hear that song. So I have you to thank for that. So thank you very much.
Oh, good. That little rush of excitement and surprise.
And ultimate disappointment. Yeah, it was all there. But it just kind of shows you that there's a connective power between music and memory, and we all have those songs.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and I'm sure you must have them too. Tell me about how music has had that kind of role for you.
Well, what's interesting is one of the songs that I can recall real quickly was only from about 15 years ago. But I remember dancing at my wedding with a really great gay friend of mine to my husband. I got married about 15 years ago to him. He's from Denver. And we danced to I Was Made to Love Her. So every time I hear that song, I think of the wedding, and it just goes right into that moment when we were young,
Yep.
together as a couple, and how fun my gay friend was, and just all those great memories. Yeah.
Well, you picked a good one. Anytime you got it's Stevie Wonder in the background of your life,
Oh yeah.
that's a pretty good choice. So
Right.
I just got a
Oh,
copy of the new
go.
record, by the way.
Oh, good, good.
And I think it's just great. It's so interesting to hear the live from Mabuhay Gardens, November 14th, 1980. What I really liked about it was, you can start to hear the gelling of that band. Everything's kind of really coming together just before you guys really start to break, and that's to me that's pretty interesting, historically, but what you guys would become soon after this. Tell me about that night and about this recording.
Well, honestly, I don't remember the specific night. I'm not sure, what night that was. I think it might have been the night that actually my mom came, and a friend of mine, Gabriela Castellan, who I'm still friends with,
Hmm.
and her and my mom were both feeling, kind of out of sorts in the club because it was a different scene for both of them. But, I'm like, come on, you got to come to one of my shows. And they were both there together. But I think it was that night because it was pretty early on. And I don't think we were headlining. I think we were either playing second or we were opening, because at the time there were so many other bands that had played longer than us in
Hmm.
San Francisco, like the Avengers and Crime and UXA and the Victims. I mean, they just go on and on. The Contractions. So I don't think we were necessarily headlining that night. The sound man from the Mabuhay Gardens is the one who made the tape,
Okay.
and he has many more tapes of other bands. So I'm really glad this one got to see the light of day. I think he's going to be delighted too, hopefully, and hopefully get approached about what other bands can you be releasing, because he got our okay just like that. We were like, oh, a live show from 1980. Great. You go for it.
Well, this is about, if I'm getting the timeline correct, this is about 9 months before you would release your first record. It's a Condition in
Yeah.
1981. This is before you guys had written Never Say Never, before a record contract shows up with 415 or Columbia for that matter. How soon after this do you guys remember getting signed, or was there already interest in Romeo Void by that point?
I'm not sure. It might not have even, we might not have even had the interest yet.
Yeah.
Because Howie Klein from 415 Records came to see us a few times, but one of the times he came, he came and saw us during a sound check, and he had been hanging out with Lester Bangs. And so he brought Lester Bangs to, the
Yep.
journalist, just in case you didn't know. So I'm sure
No.
there's younger people that don't know who Lester Bangs is. But he brought him to sound check, and Lester told Howie, "You've got to sign these guys. You need to put a record out with them." So shortly after that happened, he called me somehow. Who knows? I probably gave him my number and wanted to talk about doing a single. And when I talked to the band about it, Frank Zinkavich, the bass player, who him and I pretty much started the band, said, "I think we should hold out for doing an album. Tell them we're not ready yet." And then, like, almost everybody would have jumped at the chance to do a 415 release as a 45. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of bands already had, but I trusted Frank's instinct on that, and I thought, yeah, we do want to put out an album rather than just a 45. So I told Howie that. I think he was surprised, but he kept up, in touch with us, and probably kept seeing us, because I remember Frank telling me he came to see us quite a few times and would bring different people. And then it finally was like, okay, we have enough new material, to make a whole album. So at that, when it was getting close to that, he contacted David Kahn, who produced the first one. And at the time that he contacted David Kahn was just manning the front desk at a recording studio, but they gave him time like after midnight, and we did our initial sort of Let's Feel Each Other Out recordings with David at that Hyde Street Studios when he was like the desk guy there.
Were you guys his first production credit
I
or pretty
don't think
close
so,
to it?
but I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, because I
You
mean,
ask the best questions.
well, I know that's okay, but but I mean, that guy went on to produce everybody after that. I mean, everybody from
Yeah,
Tony Bennett to Paul McCartney to New Order and Stevie Nicks. I mean, he just did everybody. So what a diverse talent he wound up becoming over his career.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, we knew him when.
One of the things I had read in the liner notes of the album was that this was one of the earlier performances by Benjamin Bossi in the
That's
band,
right.
and I mean,
Right.
his playing is just so. I mean, it's just so much an important part of the sound of the entire band. Tell me about him. I mean, I know he died late last year from Alzheimer's, and you and Frank wrote some really beautiful, poignant recollections of Benjamin. But tell me about him a bit and how important he was to the growth of that band.
Crucial.
Yeah,
Crucial. He was like a catalyst. He just elevated us. Just his instincts and his preferences and his enthusiasm for spontaneity and responding. Like he really liked to respond to my voice. So he and I live, he was very in tune with me, how I was feeling. And, on a different night, songs sort of take on different meanings and different atmospheres and things like that. I mean, if if you're good, they should, because you're trying to be real in the moment. That's what really brings an audience to a band and to a singer is that they can feel the emotion is real, and I was pretty much, love that. And I could hear, when someone intelligent is listening to you, you step up your awareness and insight.
right.
You kind of rise to the challenge. Well, imagine being able to do that, excuse me, musically on stage.
Yeah, you do.
That was really special.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear it. I
It's
mean,
still raw for me. I'm sorry.
no, that's quite all right, and I'm sorry to have brought up any particularly
No,
painful
it's
for you.
okay.
It's
Pleasure doable though.
Yeah, well, I think what's so true about him is in a real way, and you don't see this a lot with a lot of musicians. His playing was almost like the second voice of the band.
Sure.
I mean, there's you singing, but in a way, his playing was very lyrical in its own, and you definitely see that even early on in the live record that he really was in tune to what was going on, and to hear that this was one of his first performances with the band. That's why I want to ask you about it because to me, that's the most fascinating part of the whole CD is listening to where he fits after literally just joining. It's amazing.
Yeah. And yeah, he was so good. And also, we were rehearsing a lot, so we weren't that casual about it. We had some discipline and some, regular rehearsals and our whole take on how to get known and seen and have people be our fans and everything was to just not turn down any gigs. So we were playing warehouse parties, 'cause we're going to art school, there's plenty of warehouse parties in San Francisco and after hours. And, we played a after hours party after the first time the Go-Go's came to San Francisco. They played at the Mutants Loft, and we were the band at the party. And so that was to me a huge feather in our cap because, both those bands were really happening and playing a lot. And, it was a thrill and an honor at that point.
You're not having been in San Francisco, at the time, all you can do is read about it, and you read about Mabuhay Gardens. And I interviewed Fritz Fox from the Mutants not too long ago,
Okay.
and it was great, and it just really interesting about how that club in particular, like one of these legendary clubs, kind of like a cleaner, more sanitary version of CBGB's in a way. I mean, really the epicenter, one of the epicenters of San Francisco music in the late 70s.
Absolutely.
Tell me about the club and what that the vibe of the place was really like.
Well, it was like a 1950s supper club. So it didn't have like a really tall ceiling. It was kind of intimate. At first, when they started having punk bands, they still had all the little cocktail tables and chairs, and they rapidly took all of that out except for a little mezzanine in the back. But it only held about 200 or 250 people. So it was not huge by any means, but it was pretty full almost 7 nights a week.
Wow.
Bands were playing there all the time. And that we never even had to audition though, because we luckily got asked by other bands, would you open for us? And we were like, we're not turning down gigs, of course we'll open for you. It's a Tuesday night and they opened at 11, so it was like, okay, Tuesday night at 11. We'll do it. you know
Our age now, I'm thinking, would you want to start a show at 11? At my age, I'm like, I'm in bed by like 8 o'clock at night. Please, could never do it these days. But it just sounds like it was a hell of a lot of fun, and the
Yes.
number of bands that went in and out of that club, it really is it's staggering who was coming in and out of there.
Oh yeah, and like I remember the first time Devo came to San Francisco.
Hmm.
When they played, I think they only had the 45 Mongoloid out.
Yeah.
Remember that Mongoloid? Um, and they were playing a film, of their bougie boy
Yep.
character in the little playpen, and everybody wanted to be there. So there was like a line. It didn't open till 11, the club. So there was a line to get in to Devo, where a lot of nights it'd be like, oh, it opens at 11 and you want to catch the second band, we'll get there at 11:30,
Right.
was that kind of place. You'd hang out. There was lots of cafes and bars and strip clubs and everything on Broadway in San Francisco. And I had a couple of friends who were strippers and barkers and, people, made a living down on that street. A lot of band members from other bands. Like I remember one of the guys from Crime did music at one of the strip clubs, so he was the DJ while the strippers stripped, and they'd bring him great music, and sometimes he'd suggest things for him. So a lot of the strippers had really great music, Iggy Pop and stuff
Hmm.
like that. And so it was sort of subversive for these suburban, people are out of town guests from the conventions to come in and see these, kind of hot punky strippers, dancing to Iggy Pop.
Your first hit, Never Say Never, as a 16-year-old boy, I mean, it was pretty eye-opening the first time you hear it. I mean, it's such an in-your-face song. But what I had completely forgotten about until I started, researching it a little bit, was that it had been like enthusiastically, aggressively pursued by Rick Ocasek to produce it. Rick Ocasek from the Cars. He became a very big supporter and a fan of yours. Tell me about Rick's involvement with Romeo Void.
Well, he first heard Romeo Void, It's a Condition, because one of his roadies played it on their tour bus. And so when he found out we were in town, he reached out to us and we were kind of unbelieving. What do you mean, Rick Ocasek wants to talk to us? There was like a message, for our road manager, call Rick Ocasek. And the band's all like, what's he want? What's he want? And it's like, oh, he wants to produce you guys. And we're like, oh my goodness. So we figured out a time and we were on tour at the time. So I think we went away for a few weeks to do some more shows. I don't think that was the last date in our tour, but what we did is we booked another show to come back to, so that because you have to pay for being on the road. You've got, per diems, you've got gas, you've got, we were staying in, cheap motels most of the time. So we did that. And we didn't play Never Say Never for Rick when we went to record with him, because we'd only been working on it at sound check. So the night we played, after we loaded out of the studio, the night we played at the Spit afterwards, the engineer, Ian Taylor, came and saw us. And we played it as an encore. And he came up to us afterwards, why didn't you guys play us that song? And we're like, oh, we didn't consider it was ready yet. And so
Wow.
he was like, "Well, I'm calling, everybody at the studio because we got to go in there tonight and load you back in so that we can have you record that song."
And I want to becoming a big hit for you guys, which is
It
great.
really did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That puts the band on the map. And to have Rico Kasich, I mean, an interesting guy. His choices of who he chose to produce beyond the Cars, very very interesting. I mean, there's you guys, there's Bad Brains, there's things you would not.
Suicide.
Yeah, things you.
So us knowing he had produced Suicide made him think, okay, he gets it.
Yeah, right.
Because if he can do Alan Vega, and Suicide, we'll be in good hands.
Yeah, you.
Because his music wasn't something that you'd go, oh, the Cars and Romeo Void. No, not really.
I've been reading some things about Romeo Void, and I've read this a couple of times. This comparison drawn between Romeo Void, X-Ray Specs in the UK. I mean, you got two very charismatic female singers, a lot of saxophone, great songs all around. But when I hear those songs, I also hear a pretty significant influence of Patti Smith, and I don't know if that's real or just perceived. How much influence did they have on you, Patti Smith and Polystyrene, or was that just just coincidental?
Oh, no, they were a huge influence. For one thing, I really loved how direct Polystyrene was.
Yeah.
Oh, bondage up yours. Thank you. I needed to hear that. And the other thing was, I was always interested in poetry before Patti Smith. I quit high school and started going to college by just getting the schedule of classes and showing up on the first day out at Fresno State. There was quite a poetry scene going there that had been going there since the Beat era. So I'd gone to poetry readings of like, she's not a poet, but like Gwendolyn Brooks, and I had seen Allen Ginsberg and, Galloway Cannell reading, and I was taking poetry classes to learn how to write. And from Pete Everwine and Philip Levine and Chuck Hanslacek. You may not be familiar with these names, but at the time they meant something, and they were, everyone was free verse, right? So it wasn't super structured. It was, if you have something to say it in an interesting way. And I learned so many lessons taking those classes. And then when I was teaching at a preschool, I was actually an assistant, a teacher's assistant. One of the people who worked there, he was the lead teacher, was from New York City, and he followed New York Rocker magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me, have you ever heard of like television? No. How about the Dead Boys? No. How about Patti Smith? No. So he's like, oh, I think you're going to love her. Because I was getting the kids to write poems. Because, you do whatever you can with little preschool kids. They're fun and they're open, completely open. Yeah, they're good. They're game to write poems. So anyway, he would play me records after work, and we started hanging out. And Patti Smith doing poetry and rock and roll. I was just completely taken with that and influenced by her. And I saw Patti Smith as often as I could. X-Ray Specs never came to San Francisco, but Patti sure did. Patti Smith, San Francisco always loved Patti Smith and still does.
I find it to be really interesting because, when you talk about, all three of you, you, Patti, and Polystyrene, there's a very powerful, often blunt but definitive way in which you're expressing yourself through those words. What was it about that kind of honesty in the lyrics connected to you? What was it about Patti Smith that made a difference?
I liked how she made people uncomfortable. And that was one of the lessons I learned when I was writing poetry was when you're writing, in the moment of writing, if something makes you uncomfortable, keep going because you've hit a vein. And that's going to be rich. That's going to be worth mining. So, I could play Patti Smith for my friends and they would be like, oh my God, who is she? They're not necessarily that enthusiastic, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. That was pretty radical.
Yeah.
you know. So, and I thought, yeah, I like it. But I was kind of raised that way. My mom was very progressive, and she was one of 102 veterinary students that graduated in 1949 from her college, Pullman in Washington, but only two of them were women out of those 102.
Wow.
So that's who she was. She was going to just do what she wanted in the world. She's very smart and loved to read, so I was really influenced by that as well. So my mom's a huge influence, just as far as like, don't listen to what people say and don't let them stop you. That was just the way she was, and she passed that value on to me. If you let other people define you, then who are you? Who did you become? Some kind of cultural fantasy.
It's actually a good lesson for somebody who has any artistic or creative ambition at all. Writing something that's beautiful is fine, but writing something that's real and raw is even more interesting and maybe even more artistic than just writing beautiful words that flow together, but actually coming up with an idea that may shock or just express something that is raw. So many artists.
And the
So
personal is political.
yeah, yeah, oh,
So I
absolutely.
read also Anna East Nin, who is known for her diaries and her, broad interests and her sensuality, which she completely, very candidly embraced. And so I was influenced by that as well. And because, it was a time of lots of politics when I was growing up. I went to lots of anti-war marches and movements. I went to the weekly resistance potluck at the SDS house, you know. So people doing political organizing and all that was definitely, influenced how I thought you should be in the world. But I didn't want to write political scribes or write political songs. I really had that belief that real change happens when people can personally relate to change and social change. It has to be personal with you. So I just embrace that.
It's a real good lesson for people to know because it's so easy to fall into this complacent trap of, well, these are the lyrics that people can absolutely digest, and that's not always the best creatively. Yeah, I started this off talking about A Girl in Trouble as a temporary thing. That was the other really big hit for you guys, and it's one of those songs that for me kind of defines really that whole decade. And it's like
Okay.
I always there's something about just the groove of that song. It definitely takes me back. Tell me about that song and what was it like to have even a bigger hit than what you had before? I mean, some people spend their whole lives hitting one hit. To have two of them is a lot more difficult than people give it credit for.
I would have to agree with you there. And certainly Girl in Trouble went through a lot of iterations before it was, finally recorded. And I remember sitting around with a cassette of a rehearsal where they would do these, karaoke tapes for me of just the chord changes. Okay, we're going to do this 4 times, then we'll do this 8 times, then we're going to come back to this 4 times, and kind of go for it, find your way to make some lyrics work over these parts. So that's what happened. And I remember I had a really good girlfriend who we called Teen Troublemaker. And she's just awesome. She's one of my very best friends. And she just happened to find her way of finding herself into lots of very provocative positions all the time. And she was such a good friend that her and I knew each other well, and we would have to give each other pep talks, when times were tough emotionally, or some romance or something didn't work out the way we wanted. And so Girl in Trouble for me was kind of a pep talk type of song that I was singing to another woman,
Hmm.
you know to let her know it's going to be okay. So it had that tenderness that a lot of Romeo Void songs really didn't have. And the other day I was thinking, did I write any love songs? And I thought, oh yeah, I did. Instincts is a love song
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But, not it wasn't my genre by any means. I was more, I'll dissect what the heck is going on, in these lyrics.
I was watching YouTube the other day, and I stumbled across your appearance on American Bandstand, and I thought,
Yeah.
"Holy cow, that is
Da-da-da-da-da,
how cool!"
da-da-da-da-da-da.
It's the least punk rock television show in history, but you're on freaking American Bandstand, and Dick Clark kind of seemed to know what the band was all about, which I thought was,
He did.
yeah. I mean, kind of in a way, he seemed to almost know what was going on.
He was just very open, and he had that quality of like, I don't know everything, so tell me. You know,
Yeah.
he was curious. He wanted to find out what was up and he wanted to be in on the latest things, so we were on there with New Edition.
Oh,
You've got
yep.
to cool it down. Yeah.
That's great though.
They were a very young band then.
Yeah.
They were like 16.
But what a cool video to watch. You guys on American Bandstand. I mean, even though it was all lip synced and everything, it's just it. I just thought I got a real kick out of that.
Well, if you notice, at one point, I sing away from the mic because I want to let people know I'm not really singing, you know. I'm in on the joke here, kind of, or I want you to be in on the joke that, yeah, we know this.
So not too long after the third record was released, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that Columbia started to kind of pivot their support away from you guys. And it seems as though that one of their problems was about weight. And as someone who has struggled with weight problems his entire life, I mean, I find that troubling that they would use that as some sort of liability. I mean, you guys had a top 40 hit, and people were buying that record because the music was great, not because Columbia Records had a BMI limitation in their contracts. But I just tell me about that, because I find that to be really maddening and terribly dismissive.
Well, welcome to American culture.
Oh, I know, but but even still,
welcome to people's attitude about artists. Yeah, we want the art, but we only want it packaged a certain way, that sort of thing. And I think people are pretty dismissive about it, what it really takes to be a good artist and to be a good performer. And the audience always knew. It was the record label who didn't know. It was the promo people. It was the marketing people. That was where the pressure was coming from, not the audience.
yeah.
They weren't rejecting me because of who I was. They were embracing who I was, and they could relate to me. I can't tell you how many notes I've gotten over the years. Back in the day when you got notes in the mail, like I remember Howie from 415 Records would every once in a while give me some letters that came in, fan letters and that sort of thing. But over the years, people were like, when I saw you singing, it gave me hope, because you were doing something and you had, the courage or whatever to just get up there and be yourself and, sing your truth. And that helped me get through high school or through a breakup or whatever it was. And both women and men, and certainly plenty of like brown skinned, full bodied women have written me that. Brown skinned, full bodied men, have said that. Plenty of gay guys could totally relate to me, and lesbians too. We were from San Francisco, so there was this automatic openness that we felt toward the audience and they felt toward us, that, oh yeah, okay, she's not trying to sell me herself as a product. She's trying to talk about things that matter to her, and I'm hearing it. I'm listening.
And it's exactly the same way as we were talking about poetry and lyrics, that there's the more honest you are about what you feel and who you are is a lot more powerful than trying to fit a particular physical mold of something. It's there's so much more that's real about what you would do than someone who is like a prepackaged boy band, or that it was just there because they look great. And I think you have to respect that.
Thank you.
No, I totally mean it. And like I said, as someone who has struggled with the same thing for most of his life, I
Well,
appreciate
honey, I just want you to embrace it,
that's it. You have to. That's all you really can do.
and nobody, we need to see each other more deeply. I've always believed that. And, beauty's only skin deep is true. It's real. And sexuality doesn't have to be a cultural fantasy. It can be the chemistry, the endorphins. Why did she grab your hand? Because she knew you would take it. I mean,
Mhm.
that's how those things work. You know, I always felt like I'm just looking for a yes. The no's I have no interest in because that doesn't even reflect on me because that's not what I don't want things that are unattainable. I want things that, merge and connect.
Yeah.
And I think that's how most of us are.
I think real chemistry, and then not to get too philosophical here, but I think real chemistry is blind to those kinds of markers.
Absolutely.
Same thing like when we were talking about Benjamin. Here the two of you are had a chemistry that
Yeah.
had nothing to do with who you were physically or anything. There was just a chemical connection. How wonderful to have had that with anybody in your
Yes.
life. It's where I mean, it really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
so I want to ask you about something that I also thought was really, really interesting. Once music kind of got put aside for you, you focused on art and on art education, which I think is wonderful. Tell me about that decision to focus on art rather than music.
Well, I was interested in it, and it was another avenue for me. And I have often and almost always had some little musical thing going on the side. So I put out my own CDs for a while, and they're hard to come by because hardly anyone ever bought them. And I was terrible at being my own record label, even with the internet and Facebook at the time, which is, I was on there and I remember thinking, well, I have 3,000 followers. So if I make like 1,000 CDs, eventually I'll sell them. And it'd be like, and then I would find out that fans on Facebook don't equal CD
No,
sales.
they're
I think I
they're
met
cheap.
my first CD that I invested in myself. I made 1,000, and it took me forever to sell 200.
Oh
You
yeah.
know? And that was after I sent out like 70 or 80 of them, these record stores and
So now,
radio stations.
so now they're all collecting in your garage right now.
I still have a lot of them. Yes.
Of course
In
you do.
fact, I'm going to stop by for Record Store Day.
Yep.
I'm going to stop by the night before a record store in Denver because I'm picking up my sister at the airport there. I live in northern New Mexico now. And I'm going to see if they'll take some off my hands. We'll see.
Well, I mean, the Romeo Void live album is going to be out on Record Store Day. Why not get the rest of that stuff out of your house?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just really so thrilled that Liberation Hall came along and wanted to put it out, and that Terry Hammer kept the tapes after all those years. And, they're pretty darn high quality sounds. That's just really exciting to me. I would have never believed that that would happen, and that a live record by Romeo Void in or 2023 would be a thing, you know. I'm turning 69 in like 10 days.
Well,
How
happy
is
birthday.
this happening? And I have to also credit Prime Mover Media,
Yeah.
Randy, who put us together, because he knew exactly who to have me talk to. Talking to someone like you, Baxi,
Well, Randy's
is a special thing.
I agree.
I could have never found you on my own.
Well, I appreciate that. Randy's connected me with a number of really great people, and you are absolutely no exception. So, I've had a absolutely delightful time talking with you today, and I wish you all the best of luck with the CD. It really is a lot of fun to listen to.
Yeah, so the CD is available for pre-order on Bandcamp. Just look up Liberation Hall, Romeo Void. It comes right up. And the record, the vinyl, which actually is behind me there on my
Yep.
cupboard here, um, it's beautiful blue color, and each one is unique because it's blue and white.
Oh,
It's kind
wow.
of got this cosmic or something. So it's got it, each one, because of how liquid works, is completely unique. And it's quite beautiful. And the liner notes are so good. So just the packaging, all of Frank's photos, all those Polaroids and stuff that are on, in the package, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's just a nice little piece of art, honestly.
It,
So we're thrilled.
it's great. The name of the record is Live from Mabuhay Gardens, November
Yeah.
14th, 1980. Debora, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. Best of luck, and thank Randy for putting us together, because that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Baxi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your
Anytime.
interest.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Debora. Good to see you.
All right, take care.
The name of the new album from Romeo Void is called Live from Mabuhay Gardens, November 14th, 1980, available on Liberation Hall Records. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, share it, review it, tell all your friends about it. You can find me all over social media under Baxy's Fun Bag, and you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks again for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.